In my last upload, I did my annual off-season video on player stocks I'm going to buy in this upcoming season. Not literally, of course, although I did have some ask in the comments if there is a place where you can buy or sell player stock on some sort of trading platform. No, that does not exist. But essentially calling out those players I believe will have a better than expected season, perhaps even a breakout year, or those players that everyone has written off and their value is at its lowest point. Buy low, sell high, just as one would do in the stock market. And so while we focused on those players where we should be buying low or buying below their current perceived value, in this video we're going to be going over player stocks we should be selling going into the 24-25 season, players whose value right now is at its peak and why we could see them falling below expectations, selling high before we see a dip in their overall value. And I would love to hear what you guys think of it as well. As always, if you're new to the channel and you like this type of content, it would mean a great deal to me if you subscribe to help the channel grow, and in return I'll be providing more NBA content like this. Appreciate you all for getting the channel past 80,000 subscribers. I cannot thank you all enough for the support, and now the road to 100K begins. Now, just like in my player stocks I'm buying video, a few call outs to give some context and factors that will be considered here. So when looking at a player's current stock or value around the league and understanding which ones would be a good sell, you have to consider players who currently have great value around the NBA, coming off a great season. Maybe they just signed a massive contract, and so comparing all of that to what we expect of them going into this upcoming season. So obviously things like their change in role or roster construction can have an impact on that, their age and whether it's reasonable to expect a decline in play, their current contract value relative to their production, and then of course also factoring in their injury history and whether you think their play and health is sustainable long term. So given all of that, by saying I'm selling stock in a particular player doesn't necessarily mean that I think they're a bad player, that they're going to have some sort of horrendous season where they're going to fall off. They could very well be one of the biggest stars in the league, and I'm selling high while their value is at its peak, but could likely fall in this upcoming season because of their age and the role on their team. And then the other call out is I'm obviously not going to sell a player stock that is already low, even if it's expected that they may fall even further. So no, I'm not going to be including guys like Jordan Poole or DeAndre Ayton or even Bradley Beal, players whose stock or perception around the league is already low. We should only be focusing on players' value that is high right now. So enough rambling about that. I'm sure you guys get the point. And so the player I'm going to start, a player whose stock I'm going to be selling in this upcoming season, is Daniel Gafford. Now, for those who know me well, those who've been following my Bulls Central channel before this NBA channel was even created, you know that I am a huge Daniel Gafford fan. I was livid when the Bulls traded him, and it still bothers me to this day that the Bulls did not prioritize his development. I love his energy, his hustle, his passion for the game. He's the prototype of a player I love in this league. That said though, and this is usually the case for a role player who thrives on a team and sees a deep run in the postseason where he makes a name for himself when most people had never heard of him before. For Daniel Gafford, as much as I love him, he is, at the end of the day, still just a role player. He was huge for the Mavericks in the playoffs after being traded to Dallas from the Wizards. Man's face was included in some NBA Finals promos alongside Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving. I mean, he was becoming a big deal, a difference maker for the Mavericks. And while I still think he can be great and will be an important piece for the Mavs going into the season, this is kind of that perfect time to sell a player's stock when his value is at its peak. I think of a guy like Bruce Brown after that championship run with the Nuggets, and everyone was talking about him. He got paid over the summer and then just kind of fell by the wayside after that. In the same vein, the next guy whose stock I'm selling going into the season is Derrick Jones Jr. Similar situation. Wasn't used properly in Chicago, of course, didn't have the right role to fit his skill set, leaves Chicago and comes to Dallas and thrives, another big impact player in the Mavericks postseason run. And wouldn't you know it, he ends up getting paid and signs with the Clippers. I do still think that is going to be a big loss for the Mavericks, losing such a critical role player like Derrick Jones Jr., but like Gafford, another role player who is being a bit glorified right now and a great time to sell when we'll probably see Darius Jones Jr. regress back to the mean of what we normally see from him. Let's do some of the bigger names now of players whose stock I'm selling. I'm going to start with Darius Garland. Now some would say, is his value even that high right now? This isn't like the Darius Garland coming off that all-star season. He didn't show up that well in the playoffs and is no longer the team's best player after Donovan Mitchell arrived. And yes, all of this is true, but Garland is still considered to be the second best player on the Cavs. Some say he's still a fringe level all-star and a player young enough that he still has some upside. For me, I think Garland has hit his ceiling, which is still a great player, don't get me wrong, but I don't see him getting any better than what we're currently seeing right now. But more so on why I'm selling his stock is because of Donovan Mitchell re-signing with the Cavs on a long-term extension. And as long as Mitchell and Garland are on the same roster, I don't see Garland thriving in what most people would expect. He's not going to get the same level of usage, shot attempts, etc. I could foresee a situation where he grows frustrated with his role on that team, when he was the team's best player just a couple seasons ago, which could have a negative impact on his overall performance. Still think he's going to be great. He'll be one of the Cavs' best players, but I can see him falling below expectations going into the season relative to what others have of him. Next, I've got Jimmy Butler, which is probably going to be a surprise to some people, as I think we've all learned we should never count out Jimmy. But while Jimmy still remains a star in this league, I think most would say he's still the best player in the Miami Heat, one of the best two-way players in the NBA, but the biggest issue with Jimmy Butler has always been his health. He's missed a lot of games in recent years. Last season, he injured himself in the play-in and wasn't available in the playoffs. You saw a bit of a decline from Jimmy in terms of his overall production on the court, even when he was healthy, but obviously he's still playing at a high level. But with Jimmy going into his age 35 season, the fact that he's been in trade rumors, will likely remain in trade rumors. Pat Riley showed some frustration in the media on some comments Jimmy made about the team and their playoff series against the Celtics. That tension between himself and the front office could impact his play. I just see this being a year where we don't see the typical Jimmy Butler we're used to seeing. He's getting up there in age, he obviously has his injury history, but because he's still one of the bigger names in the NBA, I think most would consider him to be a top 30 player in the league. To me, that still indicates his value is high, but I don't think it's going to be on the same level by the end of the season, and it's why I'm selling stock in Jimmy Butler. Next up, this one might surprise people as well, but I'm selling on Mikal Bridges. This one is ironic for me, as I actually have Bridges as one of my quote-unquote buy players last offseason, knowing that he was going to be the best player and number one option on the Nets. And while I still think Bridges is a great player and is able to impact both sides of the floor, but also being a pretty malleable player in that he can take on a lesser role and play multiple positions if he's asked to. And honestly, I wouldn't be selling on Bridges if it wasn't for the fact that the Knicks mortgaged their entire future to get this guy, believing that he is the piece to get them over the top. I do believe Bridges will make the Knicks even better than what they were last year, but is the roster good enough to go all the way and win a ring? No, I don't think they're on that level. I don't see them getting past the Celtics or a healthy Bucks team. And so because Bridges' value has now been dictated by the insane haul the Knicks handed over to get him in the form of 5 first-round picks, that instantly puts Bridges' stock well above where it should be. If I was a betting man, I would be selling said stock while I can. The next one on this list is probably my biggest hot take in a player that I would be selling stock in, and that's De'Aaron Fox. Hear me out. Fox is an incredible player, an amazing athlete, and he's coming off one of the best seasons of his career, being selected as an all-star for the first time. Elevated his shooting to make him even more of a lethal and efficient scorer. And once again, like some of these other guys that I've mentioned before, I still think Fox is going to be great in this upcoming season and be one of the best point guards in the league. The only reason I'm selling stock in De'Aaron Fox is one, his value is very high right now, and him now becoming an all-star, even though I think most would agree he was an all-star before last season but was snubbed a few times. But now that he has the all-star status attached to his name, he becomes one of the more elite three-point shooters in the NBA when that was seen as a weakness to his game before. So you have a player that most would say is one of the more untouchable athletes in his prime right now. But going into the season, and primarily because of the addition of DeMar DeRozan, I see Fox's role, usage, and style of play changing quite a bit. Look, coming from a Bulls fan and someone who loves DeMar, the way he carries himself both on and off the court, his veteran leadership, professionalism, an elite scorer, and one of the most clutch players in the league. The fact still remains that DeMar is a ball-dominant player who is much more effective in the half court, a heavy isolation player who slows down the overall pace of the game. Now don't get me wrong, DeMar knows when to defer to others, and he's actually a very underrated passer and playmaker, but he's still going to get his touches, he's still going to get his shots up, and that's going to reduce the overall number of shots for Fox that he's going to get on a nightly basis. And it's also going to limit his ability to keep up the pace and play heavily in transition, which De'Aaron Fox is very good at. Fox is still going to be the go-to option on offense. He's still going to get his 22 plus points per night, but because the Kings have added another star-level player, Fox's numbers and production is going to reduce quite a bit. So I'm selling stock on Fox while it's at an all-time high. And then finally, the last player I'm selling stock heading into this season is the Lakers' Austin Reaves. Look, Reaves is a fine player. And if he wasn't so overly hyped, not even just by Lakers and their fans, but even the national media, I would say he's one of the better high-rated role players in the league that doesn't get enough praise. But with the way this man gets talked about, the amount of media coverage, the Lakers refusing to include him in any trade deals to actually make meaningful upgrades to their roster, it's gotten to a point where Reaves has become one of those more overrated players in the NBA, a player that is often hyped up like he's a star in the making, when in reality, we're talking about a role player with the ceiling of being just a role player. But because his value still remains high, and you have people thinking he's going to be a star in this league, it's a great time to sell on Austin Reaves while you can, especially considering I don't see this season panning out too well for the Lakers. So there you have it, selling high on these players for this upcoming season. I would love to hear some of the guys you think will have worse than expected years, maybe even some that might be a surprise who have a lot of hype and intrigue going into the year. So let me know what you guys think. Let me know in the comments. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.